Hi, this is Victor with Programmatic Academy. We'll be discussing campaign setup today. Lesson 1 will be creatives in pixels, which is probably the most important part of any campaign, whether it's on programmatic or not. One thing we want to do before uploading the creatives, and I just want to point out that the reason we want to upload creatives first on any platform is in order to get a feel for how well they have been received or approved or disapproved by the different sources that we're trying to run on. And the reason is that as we discussed earlier in the course or in the previous courses, so a DSP connects to different publishers and different ad exchanges. All of those guys have different requirements. So you want your creative to be obviously accepted to as many as of those sources as possible. But each of those publishers, they have their own specifications for the creative. So we always want to test our creatives by uploading them first into our campaigns or into our DSP when we're buying, and see how well they do as far as approval. Obviously, before you do that, and that was just a point I wanted to make and stress, okay? Obviously, before you do that, you want to decide which formats you're going to use. At minimum, and I would say to start off any basic programmatic campaign, you want to go with a standard 300 by 250, a 100 by 600, or 120 by 600, depending on how you're measuring the skyscraper, and a leaderboard 728 by 90. Okay, these are the minimum amount of, or the minimum, I would say, formats required for running on programmatic and in display in general. What, if any, ad server will you use? So if you're an agency, your client may require you to use a third-party ad server. I think that's pretty standard. Some of the main ad servers on the left there, DoubleClick, we all know, which is DFA, DoubleClick for advertisers. They've changed their name, I think, a few times over the years. Next, Sysmic as well. Used to be called MediaMath. Before that, iBlaster. And Atlas by Facebook, which, as far as I understand, some people use, but is not very user-friendly. So just keep that in mind, because that may be a very integral part of the campaign. If you don't have an ad server, no problem. I would say most DSPs can serve directly without any issue. Simply upload the direct creative or banner, whether it be HTML5 or a JPEG or a GIF. It can run with no problem. All right, so for our exercise and for our example on some of these things and some of these steps to creatives and pixels, I've used MediaMath as our DSP. Obviously it could be any, and the point is, I think once you start using a lot of these platforms, they pretty much all have very similar or basically the same options. Some are a little friendlier than others. Some are better looking than others. As someone who's been online in digital marketing since 2003, 2004, entering into so many different platforms, they all just start to look alike, and you start to get a feel for them and how to use them. Okay. So for our purposes now, we're going to be using MediaMath, and essentially here's the first step of anything is how to set up an advertiser. Okay, So pick an organization. I've blocked out a few names because of privacy issues. I don't want to, get in trouble with anyone. But essentially, you pick your org, which could be your company, it could be your department, or it could be your country, depending if you're an agency or a brand. The agency as well is just another level in the breakdown of how it's segmented. If we go from left to right on this screen, advertiser name. This is whoever you're running for. It could be your own if you're a brand. Could be your client if you're an agency. Domain name. Advertiser vertical means whatever category they fall into. And then ad server of record. This is like I said in the previous ones. If you are running a third-party ad server like DFA, Dart, Sysmic, pointed out here so the platform knows. And then frequency cap. My personal opinion is at the advertiser level, it's not super important because you'll be running hopefully many different campaigns. So you'll want to be able to adjust those on a campaign or even at a strategy level, which we'll discuss later. Okay. Minimize ad collisions. I think that's an important one to check off. This is, excuse me, this is worded, I think, in particular to, exclusively to MediaMath. But essentially what this means is, it prevents, let's say, 3 different banner ads from appearing on the same page. A lot of times that freaks out the advertiser, and a lot of times it wastes your money essentially. So by checking that option, it prevents going through that. You could set this up at the advertiser level, and then it will kind of boil down to the campaign and strategy level once we begin to set up different campaigns. So I encourage, if you're using MediaMath, to use this. If not, another platform, which we will go into in other courses, different platforms, to select any option that will let you do this. The segments option, all the way at the bottom left, would be to enable the DMP function. Again, this all goes back to how you are set up. If you are a brand and you already have first-party data and you want to start using a data management platform in order to maximize reach and insights with all those things, then maybe enable that so you can connect, which we'll discuss a lot further down in the courses. But I would say for a standard campaign, if you have no first-party data or personal company CRM, leave it disabled for the moment, and we could always come back and start a campaign and enable that. All right, so if we are setting up our, it looks like a lot of different steps, but if we are, let's say, like I mentioned at the first step, just to see if our banners will be accepted and work, if we are at the first step of setting up creatives, as they're called, if we look at the left hand side where we see name, I always suggest to have a naming convention for your company or agency. It's a lot easier to determine what creatives belong to what campaign, by date, by size. This one is very basic, but I think your trafficking or digital department should decide on using a naming convention in order to standardize basically every campaign, because it will be a lot easier to read and get some insights later, further on, once everything starts. Okay, Advertiser, obviously select what the advertiser is if we're reading here from left to right. Okay. Um, Specifically for MediaMath, they have a thing called concept, which essentially is just a name that encompasses a set of creatives or banners for a specific campaign. It will give you the option to do that. I think most of the other platforms have something similar. And again, I want to emphasize that I've used MediaMath because, as far as my experience goes right now, it's has been one of the easiest and best to use. Not to take away from any of the others that I may not have experience in, but like I said, I think going through all of these, they more or less have very similar options. So it's more about the idea rather than the explicit platform that I'm proposing here. Okay. Secure, as if you've been following a lot of the news within marketing and advertising and ad tech, Google is only looking at secure tags right now, secure sites. So try and always use secure. Landing page, whatever your landing page may be. I don't think it's important for the creative specifically, but put it in there anyway. Ad server name, I think it's self-explanatory. Tag ID. A lot of times this will auto-populate once you paste the tag, which we'll see in the next screen. In case it doesn't, just copy and paste into this section right there, which says 3PAS tag ID, basically third party tag ID. File type, like I said, we've moved away from Flash and things like that. HTML5 or basically a generic or standard, JPEG or GIF if you want your creative or banner to run on as many sources as possible. Let's see. Add tag type, JavaScript. I always suggest using JavaScript simply because JavaScript communicates quickest amongst all the different options. So if you have JavaScript and you're trying to communicate with pixels and tags from the banners, etc., it communicates the quickest. There's other options like image tags, etc. You may need to use those depending on the settings of your site or whatnot, but always try and use JavaScript if it's an option. In this case, add format is display. So there's others that we'll discuss later on, but for our purposes right now, it's just display. And the dimensions for this one in particular, 300 by 250, which I always recommend. If you only have one banner to use the 300 by 250. Historically, it's been the best performing one by far. And finally, I think at the bottom, if you want to schedule creatives, let's say you want to do one type of banner for 1 week, a second type for another week. This is where you would put in the dates. So when one ends, the other one starts. You can have that option, and this option is available in almost every platform I've ever had the experience of working with. And this is sample code, code essentially of a tag from Google DFA. If you see the top end of the tag code there, it is what we've gotten from the site. And a lot of times what happens when you paste into a DSP in order to run that tag and that creative, it will ask you to put in a macro. Okay, so in this case, MediaMath asks us to put in a random number, and that's where we pasted that. So that's why the second half has the check mark as the one we should use, and the top end is the one we should not use, because you will have issues getting tracking information or even running that creative if you don't put in that macro required by MediaMath. And like I said, sometimes it auto populates itself on different platforms depending who you're working with. But I know in this case you definitely have to verify and make sure that you are using that macro on your tag. Otherwise, you will not be collecting information, okay, from your banners, creatives. So pixels. Pixels are basically the little image that could. They serve such a huge purpose in everything, regarding ad tech, media buying, performance, digital. It's incredible that this one by one image does all these things. And as such, a pixeling strategy is super important. And I've mentioned this before on our previous course. Okay. And in fact, pixeling, if you're an agency, okay, and you have an approved campaign with a client, if those pages aren't pixeled and tagged before doing anything else, I would say that you create pixels, work with your trafficking team, map out a good pixeling strategy, create the pixels, create the tags on if you're using an ad server, and send those off to the web development team on the client side and have them implemented as soon as possible. And why is that? Because the sooner you have pixels implemented on the site, especially from the DSP when you're using programmatic, the sooner it starts collecting data. You see, programmatic is something that does not start delivering results or working, immediately or effective immediately once it just it launches. Okay, it requires traffic, it requires data, and it requires some time. At minimum, I think I've said 30 days. It'd be best to do 3 months. So if you have the ability to implement pixels, please do so as soon as possible, even before the campaign starts, especially before the campaign starts. If you have that option, do it 2-3 weeks, a month out. Just implement them. You'll start gathering data. You'll start gathering, pixel fires and numbers, and you'll be able to see a lot of info before you even launch, and that will make your campaign perform so much better. Okay. So if you've followed our example here for our Ad Killer product site, we've said that at minimum, the home page, the landing page, and the checkout page, and the thank you or confirmation page should be tagged and pixeled. Okay. Now, to create a pixel, I think it's super easy, very simple. We go and every platform that I've worked with has this option. All right, you go and some might call it a segmentation pixel or some other name, but essentially it's just a pixel. All right. So here, we leave it as active. We select advertiser, revenue attribution. If in fact we're trying to track how much revenue is attributed to each conversion, we can select that option, and then that will give us the ability to put in the V variables, which I'll discuss later on. Currency in the name, confirmation page. Most of the time, at least what MediaMath calls event pixels, you will be selecting an event pixel, which means when something happens. So if we put this pixel on the confirmation page, it will fire as soon as a confirmation, a buy, a sale, a lead, whatever, and some sort of action happens. Okay, that's why it's an event pixel. And again, if we have the option, use JavaScript for your pixels. And a lot of times in all the platforms that I've used, you have the option, and this is just basically for reference, to put where that pixel is located. If you have a few, this is fine. If you have dozens, it's okay as well, but it can get kind of overwhelming to put the where they are, and this is just for reference again. Okay. So now, coming to the end of this lesson, here is the quiz, and so I will be asking what 3 standard creative formats should be used to start. Why should you implement pixels? What is the ideal format you should use? And what purpose does the confirmation pixel serve? Thanks for listening and good luck. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments below. Thank you.